The story: a father's betrayal, a grandfather's legacy. She was in the hospital ICU with her son, while her husband enjoyed time with his mistress. But his father found out and did something no one believed. The cold, sterile air of the pediatric intensive care unit at St. Jude's Hospital had already become an extension of Sophia's own body. It was a cold that pierced the bones, but it didn't compare to the ice that had formed in her chest. There, sitting in an uncomfortable armchair that had become her home for the last few months, she held the tiny hand of Matteo, her 4-month-old son. Each gentle beep of the heart monitor was both a torture and a blessing, a constant reminder of the fragility and strength of that small life. Matteo's body, so small and defenseless, was connected to a complex web of tubes and wires that kept him alive. The diagnosis, cystic fibrosis in an aggressively advanced stage, had fallen upon them like a sentence. The only hope, a double lung transplant, was a procedure of extremely high risk and astronomical cost, a mountain that seemed impossible to climb. While Sophia counted her son's shallow breaths, her husband, Alejandro Vance, was across the city, in a parallel universe where illness and despair did not exist. He was at the Azure Lounge at the Summit Hotel, with its stunning view of the city skyline. The ambient sound was soft electronic music and carefree laughter, not ICU monitors. In his arms was not the son struggling to breathe, but Isabel Andrade, a stunning and ambitious architect he had met at an event for the family's construction company. Champagne bubbled in her glass as Alejandro handed her a small blue velvet box from Tiffany & Company. Inside, a diamond necklace sparkled under the city lights, a glittering symbol of betrayal. "To celebrate our future," he whispered, his breath warm with the smell of expensive whiskey. Isabel smiled, a smile that promised a world without complications, without hospitals, without sick children. A world where the only commitment was to pleasure and success. The fracture, for Sophia, the concept of the future had been reduced to the next few hours. Her life, once filled with the dreams of a young physical therapist, newly married and in love, was now summed up by interpreting graphs on monitors, discussing medical protocols with an exhausted team, and whispering promises into the ear of a baby who might never hear them. She remembered with painful clarity the beginning of everything. Alejandro Vance, the heir to the powerful construction company Vancemar, had won her over with charming persistence. He was the patient she treated after a skiing accident, a man whose charisma seemed to fill any room. He took her from her middle-class world and inserted her into a universe of luxurious dinners, weekends in the Hamptons, and the promise of a fairy tale love. The wedding, a lavish ceremony for the city's elite, seemed to confirm that she had found her happy ending. The first fissure in that perfect facade appeared with the pregnancy. Alejandro, who once spoke enthusiastically about having an heir for the Vance empire, became strangely distant. The news of Matteo's illness, received during a late morphological ultrasound, was the blow that shattered the fairy tale. Sophia saw something die in her husband's eyes that day. Compassion was replaced by cold calculation, love by veiled resentment. "We'll figure it out," he would say, but his words were hollow, devoid of any conviction. Alejandro's figuring it out was stepping away, creating an insurmountable emotional barrier. The long nights at the hospital, which should have been faced together, became Sophia's solitary vigil. Alejandro always had an excuse, an unmissable meeting, an urgent business trip, a dinner with investors that couldn't be canceled. The truth was, the investors had a name and a surname: Isabel Andrade. The excuse for the lack of funds for Matteo's treatment was always the same: the economic crisis, company bureaucracy, the need to maintain business liquidity. "We can't just take millions out of the company, Sophia. That's not how it works," he would explain with condescending patience, as if she were a child, incapable of grasping the complexity of the business world. Little did she know that the money existed, but was being diverted to finance a double life, to build a future on the ashes of the family he was abandoning. The final betrayal. Sophia's loneliness was an abyss. Only the patriarch Antonio Vance, a man of few words and a penetrating gaze, showed genuine concern. He called every morning, not to ask about Alejandro, but to ask about Mateo. "How did my grandson pass the night?" he would ask, his deep voice carrying an emotion Sophia couldn't decipher. He was a small beacon of humanity in an ocean of indifference. On that specific night, while the diamond necklace was being placed around Isabel's neck, Sophia received a visit from Dr. Elias, the head of pediatric pulmonology. His words were direct. "Sophia, time is running out. Lucas's lungs are collapsing. We need to put him at the top of the transplant list and start pre-operative procedures immediately. This involves costs the health plan does not fully cover. We are talking about an initial sum of nearly $1 million to secure logistics in the team. $1 million. The number echoed in Sophia's mind, a dull, terrifying sound. She grabbed her cell phone, hands shaking, and called Alejandro. The call went to voicemail after the first ring. She tried again. And again. On the fourth attempt, he answered, his voice annoyed and muffled by the music in the background. "Sophia, I'm in the middle of a vital meeting. What is it?" "It's Mateo," she said. Her voice choked. "The doctor said we need the money now. His time is running out, Alejandro." There was a pause on the other end. Sophia could hear a woman's laughter in the background. "Look, I already told you I can't raise that amount overnight. The company is going through an audit. I'll see what I can do tomorrow. Now I have to go." And he hung up. The ended call was like a physical blow. The vital meeting was more valuable than his own son's life. The reality he asked her to understand was that he had made his choice, and the choice was not her, nor Mateo. It was Isabel, the champagne, the diamond necklace, and the promise of a life without the burden of a sick child. In that moment, sitting next to the acrylic crib, Sophia understood the full dimension of the abandonment. He was actively choosing his son's death by denying him the resources to live, while squandering those very resources on his own pleasure. The ice in her chest solidified, turning the pain into a resolution as cold and hard as steel. She would fight for Mateo, alone if necessary. She would move heaven and earth, face the world, but she would not let her son die. Little did she know that, in a mansion, an old patriarch, tormented by his own ghosts, was already moving the pieces of a chess game that would change all their destinies, preparing a revenge that would echo from the grave. The will and the claws of justice. The death of Antonio Vance was particularly abrupt, a sudden heart attack that shook the foundations of the family and the empire he built. For Alejandro, the news quickly morphed into a calculation of opportunity. The pain of losing his father was overshadowed by the anticipation of the inheritance. The patriarch was gone, and with him, the last obstacle to his total control over Vancemar and its fortune, valued at over $15 million. The reading of the will was set for a week after the funeral. Alejandro was there, impeccable in an Italian linen suit, his constrained expression of grief poorly hiding the impatience of an heir about to take possession of his kingdom. Sophia was also present, convinced by an insistent call from the family lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man of integrity and loyal to Antonio for decades. "Your presence is indispensable, Sophia. It is an express request your father-in-law left." Mr. Davies, a man with white hair and shoulders bowed by the weight of corporate secrets, cleared his throat. We are here today to fulfill the last wishes of Mr. Antonio Vance. He informed them that an amendment had been added and notarized exactly 2 weeks ago, just days before his passing. Alejandro frowned. An amendment? His father had mentioned nothing. Mr. Davies opened the sealed envelope. I, Antonio Vance, in full use of my mental faculties, the lawyer began, his voice firm. I leave my final decisions registered. The Vancemar Construction Company was built with sweat, integrity, and a fundamental principle, that our legacy is not measured in concrete, but in character. A man who does not honor his own family, who does not protect his own offspring, is neither worthy of leading nor inheriting. Mr. Davies paused dramatically. Therefore, after a careful and painful investigation into the conduct of my only son, I have decided to irrevocably alter the disposition of my assets. The investigation revealed that my son, Alejandro Vance, not only abandoned his wife and his severely ill son in their moment of greatest need, but was also systematically diverting company funds. Sophia brought her hand to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips. The image of Alejandro's false patience, explaining the impossibility of getting money from Mateo, while in reality, he was stealing the fund intended precisely for that, was of an almost unimaginable cruelty. Alejandro's face turned a pale, deathly white. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Mr. Davies didn't give him a chance. The investigation conducted by a top-tier agency revealed a pattern of fraud and deceit. We have here bank statements, corporate credit card invoices used for personal expenses of a romantic nature, dinners, stays in presidential suites, the purchase of high-value jewelry, everything paid for with the money that should have been available for the treatment of his son, Mateo. In light of the foregoing, and based on the conviction that the legacy of the Vance family must be one of compassion and responsibility, and not of selfishness and cowardice, Antonio Vance determined the following changes. Alejandro de Almeida Luz is hereby completely disinherited from all assets, shares, properties, and funds belonging to me or the Vancemar Construction Company. He will not receive a single cent. A collective gasp swept through the room. Alejandro finally found his voice. This is absurd! It's illegal! My father was senile, manipulated. I will contest this farce. Mr. Davies raised a hand, silencing him. Your father anticipated that reaction, Alejandro, which brings me to the second and main disposition of the will. The entirety of Antonio Vance's inheritance, including his majority stake in the Vancemar Construction Company and all his personal investments, will be transferred to an irrevocable trust. This trust will have a single beneficiary, Mateo Ferraz Luz. The total amount was approximately $15 million. The resources were to be used to cover all of Mateo's medical expenses, treatments, education, and well-being for the rest of his life, without any limit. Sophia's tears finally came, not of pain, but of a relief so profound it was almost painful. It was her son's redemption, delivered by the hands of the grandfather who had barely known him, but who had loved him in a way his own father was incapable of. Alejandro, on the other hand, looked on the verge of collapse. I will not accept this. I am his son. I built this company with him. I will take this to court. I wouldn't advise you to do that, Alejandro, Mr. Davies interrupted, his voice calm, but with a tone of final warning. Your father, in his wisdom, included an in terrorem clause, also known as a no-contest clause. It stipulates that if any heir or interested party initiates any type of legal dispute to contest the validity of this will, the Vancemar Construction Company must be immediately liquidated. The company will be sold, and 100% of the value collected, along with all of Antonio's personal fortune, will be donated entirely to St. Jude's Hospital for the construction of a new pediatric pulmonary treatment wing. The final blow. The checkmate. Alejandro stopped, his body trembling with helpless rage. His father had not only disinherited him, he had cornered him. Contesting the will would not bring the inheritance back. It would only destroy the family legacy forever, annihilate the company upon which the present directors and relatives depended, and brand him not just as an unworthy son, but as the destroyer of the Vansmar Empire. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from Isabel. "So, my love, can we celebrate now? I can't wait to start our life." Alejandro looked at the screen, at the smiling photo of the woman for whom he had risked everything, and felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He had not just lost a fortune, he had lost everything. And the fall was just beginning. The bottom of the well. The elite he courted had judged and condemned him. Abandoning his wife was a tolerable slip-up. Abandoning a sick child to die while stealing from his own family was an unforgivable violation of decorum. He was ejected from the business community. His company car was collected. His apartment was evicted. In a matter of weeks, he went from a man whose wealth was counted in tens of millions to a man with no car, no house, and a ruined reputation. The loft of Isabel Andrade quickly transformed into a silent battlefield. She had seen him as an investment project, and Alejandro's disinheritance was the total failure of her crucial investment. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. Alejandro, after another day of rejections, tried to initiate a conversation about their future. "Maybe we can move out of Sao Paulo, start over somewhere else. Miami, perhaps. I can get a job as a construction manager, something to restart." Isabel, applying an expensive facial cream in front of the mirror, turned to him with cold, surgical clarity. "We are not going anywhere, Alejandro. I am not going anywhere. My career is here. My contacts are here. My life is here." "What future, Alejandro? The future you promised me involved a mansion, not a rented apartment in Miami. You are a toxic name, a tainted brand. Staying by your side now would be professional and social suicide. I am an architect, Alejandro. I build things. I don't cling to demolitions." She packed his bags. A box contained the expensive gifts he had given her, including the diamond necklace. It was a final declaration. Those objects no longer held any value for her because they no longer represented the future she coveted. Expelled from the last refuge he had, Alejandro found himself completely adrift. He was forced to swallow his pride and move into a small, rented flat in a modest neighborhood, paid for with the rest of his personal savings. The Italian suits were replaced by ordinary clothes, and 18-year-old whiskey by cheap beer. Months passed. It was during this time, idly flipping through a celebrity magazine in a supplier's waiting room, that he saw the photo that sealed his isolation. It was Isabel, radiant, at a gala. On her arm was an older, gray-haired man, Arthur Guedes, a notorious and successful shark in the financial market. The caption was short and brutal. "Architect Isabel Andrade and magnate Arthur Guedes, the new couple, announced their engagement at a charity event." The engagement! The word hit him like a punch. Isabel had not just moved on. She had secured an upgrade. He had lost not only the inheritance and the mistress, but himself. He had become a ghost in his own life, haunted by the ruins of what could have been, completely alone in the world he himself destroyed. The fall was over. Now only the void remained, redemption and the broken cycle. While Alejandro's world disintegrated, a universe of hope and rebirth flourished under the protection of Antonio Vance's legacy. Mr. Davies delivered to Sophia a personally sealed envelope from Antonio. "My dear Sophia," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it is because my journey has ended, and Mateo's can finally begin for real, and it is imperative that you understand why. The letter was a confession, a testament of pain that stretched back decades. Antonio revealed the darkest chapter of his life. He had had a previous marriage, a young wife, and a daughter named Luana. Luana, like Matteo, was born with a fragile health condition, and the young, ambitious Antonio abandoned them. I was a coward, Sophia. I saw my daughter not as a blessing, but as an obstacle to my dreams of greatness. I built an empire on the foundation of that abandonment, and every brick I laid was a brick upon the grave of my own humanity. When I saw in Alejandro the same fear, the same weakness, the same selfishness that defined me as a young man, I knew the cycle needed to be broken. Protecting Matteo was not just about saving my grandson. It was about saving my son's soul from committing the same unforgivable sin I committed, and perhaps, selfishly, finding some peace for my own. The money I leave for Matteo is not an inheritance. It is an apology to Luana, whom I could not save, and an act of faith in Matteo, who can now be saved. Break the cycle, Sophia. Show him that the true legacy of the Vance family is not what we build, but whom we protect. With the now unlimited resources, the path to Matteo's recovery opened like a Red Sea. Sophia, transformed from a desperate mother to a commander of a rescue mission, mobilized the best medical team money could buy. A private jet, configured as an air ICU, took Matteo and a team of specialists to Pittsburgh, home to one of the world's most advanced pediatric transplant centers. The transplant, a 12-hour surgical marathon, was a success. Months later, the recovery was miraculous. The baby who had spent most of his life in a hospital bed now had energy. Matteo learned to roll, to sit up, to smile with his whole body. At 14 months, holding on to his mother's steady arms, Matteo took his first tentative steps. Each step a challenge to the death sentence he had received. Sophia also underwent a rebirth. The experience forged her into a woman of unwavering strength and purpose. She was no longer the young physical therapist dazzled by the world of the wealthy. She was a leader, a strategist, an advocate. She presented the Luz de Vida Foundation project to the Vance Mar board, a significant portion of the annual profits used to finance high-cost treatments for children with rare diseases. The foundation became a resounding success, redefining Vance Mar's image and giving a new, profound meaning to its work. The final meeting, 2 years passed. Matteo was a vibrant, curious child, running through the garden of the mansion, his crystal laughter echoing between the trees his grandfather had planted. He was surrounded by unconditional love. For Alejandro, they were years of freefall. He lived in a tiny flat in the outskirts, the noise of luxury replaced by the brutal silence of his anonymity. He saw the news about the foundation, about Sophia, about Matteo's growth in magazine photos. Every image was a torture, a glimpse of the paradise from which he had been expelled by his own sins. It was on a gray autumn afternoon that the past knocked on the door of the present. Mr. Davies called Sophia. Alejandro had requested, through a public defender, a single thing: the chance to see Matteo. He wanted to beg for forgiveness. Sophia's first reaction was a visceral no, but looking at Matteo, she remembered Antonio's letter. Break the cycle. Denying Alejandro this chance would not be protecting Matteo. It would be teaching him to hate, perpetuating the pain. The true power, she realized, was not in slamming the door, but in opening it on her own terms, showing her son that forgiveness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. The meeting was arranged for a reserved area of a park. Sophia arrived with Matteo by the hand. Then, she saw him. Alejandro was sitting on a bench, and the sight was a shock. The arrogant, impeccable man had given way to a figure stooped, thin, aged. His cheap clothes hung on his body, and the gaze, once sparkling with self-confidence, was now that of a frightened animal, weighted with the burden of 1,000 sleepless nights. When his eyes met Matteo's, he faltered, as if the sight of that healthy, happy child were a light too strong for his darkness. Sophia knelt beside her son. "Matteo, remember Mommy told you about your daddy, the one in the photo? He came to see you and wants to tell you something very important." Alejandro approached, hesitant, and knelt on the grass, putting himself at the child's level. Tears streamed freely down his face. He looked only at the boy, at the miracle he had discarded, at the life he had refused to save. "Hi, champ," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse and choked. "I'm Alejandro, your father, and I came here to tell you the most important thing in the world. I came to ask for your forgiveness." He didn't try to justify himself. He just wept, a convulsive cry, the sound of a heart finally shattered completely. Matteo, with the pure innocence of children, did not see the monster of his history. He saw only a sad man. He looked at Sophia, who gave him a gentle smile, and then turned to Alejandro. He extended his small hand and touched his father's wet face. He said nothing, just touched, a simple, non-judgmental gesture. In that touch, Alejandro felt the overwhelming weight of his failure, but also, for the first time, a tiny, fragile, and almost unbearable seed of grace. He got up, thanked Sophia with a look that contained a universe of regret, and walked away, back to his life of shadows. But now, there was a crack of light. Sophia hugged Matteo tightly. The cycle was broken. Matteo would grow up knowing that true love is not defined by the absence of flaws, but by the ability to face them with courage and compassion. The true legacy of Antonio Vance was not the millions in the bank. It was right there, in that park, in the choice of a mother to teach forgiveness instead of revenge, in the proof that the greatest of all constructions is, and always will be, the reconstruction of a human heart. Epilogue. Atonement and Legacy. 2 years after the park encounter, Alejandro Vance had truly vanished from Sao Paulo's high society, but not to hide. He was in another state, living in a small wooden house near a construction site for a non-profit organization. Alejandro no longer wore Italian suits or drove luxury cars. He had started from scratch, working a manual construction job. He had chosen a path of atonement based on what he once scorned: honest labor and purpose. He often sent handwritten letters to Sophia via Mr. Davies, not to ask for money or beg for forgiveness, but to update her on his progress. He had worked as a project foreman for an orphanage. He had learned to live with little, and finally, he understood the meaning of the word enough. He never asked about Matteo, understanding that this privilege had to be granted by Sophia, not requested. Sophia's new vision for Sophia. These years were years of strength and growth. She not only managed the Vancemar empire with the support of the trustworthy board led by Mir Davies, but also transformed the Luz de Vida Foundation into a national symbol. One evening, while watching the news, Sophia saw Alejandro appear briefly in a segment about community building efforts. His face was leaner, but his eyes had changed. It was no longer the arrogant gaze of a businessman, but the quiet gaze of a man who had found humility. After Matteo, now Pitio, healthy and active, went to sleep, Sophia opened one of Alejandro's letters. She noticed a profound difference. Alejandro had fully accepted his mistakes without blaming anyone else. 2 weeks later, Sophia called Mr. Davies with a new request. "I want to organize a meeting with Alejandro," Sophia said. "Not for me, but for the foundation. We have a major infrastructure project in the north, that needs someone with construction expertise who can work under the Foundation's anonymous banner. I believe Alejandro is the best fit." Mr. Davies was surprised. "Sophia, that's a risk. The risk is there. But Antonio taught me that legacy isn't what we build, but who we protect," Sophia said. "This is his chance to atone by building something truly meaningful instead of destroying it." The reunion under the guise of work. The reunion took place in Mr. Davies's office. Alejandro walked in, no longer the man who had knelt in apology in the park, but a calm construction expert. "Hello, Alejandro," Sophia said, maintaining a completely professional demeanor. "I have a job offer for you." Alejandro said nothing about the past, offering no apology. He simply listened in silence. "The job requires full-time dedication, with no public recognition," Sophia continued. "It will be salaried, but you will work for the Foundation. It will be closely monitored. In return, you will build something truly great for the children who need it. You will be building dreams instead of destroying them." Alejandro looked at her, the first time in years. "I accept," he said. "But I have one condition. All my salary will be donated back to the Foundation's projects. I don't need the money. I only need the opportunity to atone." Sophia nodded, understanding that he had truly changed. "And if I complete this project, Sophia," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "may I ask for one thing that is not money or a job? Just one thing." "What is it?" "To be allowed to write one letter, just one letter, to Mateo. To explain, when he is old enough to understand, that his father chose a different path, but finally found the way back." Sophia looked at the man who was once her husband, the one who had lost everything for ambition, but found his worth in sacrifice. "You may write that letter," Sophia said, her voice softer. "Mateo will receive it on his 18th birthday. Until then, build the legacy he will be proud of." And so, Alejandro Vance began his true journey of atonement, not with words, but with bricks and mortar, building a better future under the leadership of the woman he once abandoned. Antonio Vance's legacy lived on, not only by saving Mateo, but by offering salvation to those who had made mistakes.